Yeah, Katie designed it.
Props to Katie.
Thank you. It was designed in Canva.
I also
appreciate templates.
Yes. So we are officially live streaming now. Katie designed it.
Props to Katie.
Okay, I'm admitting everyone. Annie, I just realized that on the live stream, when you are spotlit, it's only you that is showing.
Do you want me to take off the spotlight?
Yeah, I think so. And we'll just keep the folks with the video participants on. Let's see if that does anything. Okay, now, what if, can you spotlight yourself again, Annie? And then Melanie, can you try speaking?
Hello, testing. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, perfect.
Just waiting for it to show on the stream. It's a little delayed. Oh, it's not going to show. Huh. I'm not quite sure what to do. It might just be the ASL interpreters during the screen share, Melanie.
Okay, that's fine.
I think everyone's in here. If you want to get started.
Okay. Hold on one second. Did Bob, did you get your video back on?
Hold on.
I'm sure he has.
It says host has stopped my video.
Oh yes, I intentionally stopped it.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay,
Okay.
we can get started. Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Melanie Elvena. I'm the artistic director at the Asian Pacific Islander Cultural Center. If you don't know about us, our mission is to support and present multidisciplinary art that's reflective of the unique experiences of Asians and Pacific Islanders living here in the United States. This is our first program for the fall after our festival, The Art of Protest. We're very excited for our lineup that we have today. I just wanted to quickly, though, set some ground rules before we begin. We're here to listen to our artists and hear what they have to say. So just reminding you to be mindful and respectful, and that we keep our videos off and ourselves on mute while they're speaking. And if necessary, hosts can remove any individuals who are disruptive from the call. And if you are removed, you will not be able to come back into the call. So just letting you know about that. I just wanted to make some quick statements of gratitude, recognizing my fellow staff member here, Diana Lee. She is going to be our Zoom tech extraordinaire. She's kind of running the whole back end of our event today. So thank you, Diana, for doing that. I also want to acknowledge the land that we are currently settlers on. I'm coming to you from Ramaytush Ohlone land, otherwise known as the San Francisco Bay Area. And I also want to acknowledge the Black Lives Matters movement and the fight for racial justice here that we're going through right now. We stand in solidarity with our Black brothers and sisters going through this time. And I'm also going to acknowledge the privilege that we're able to come together, even though we can't be here in person, that we are here together virtually in this online event. So thank you so much for being a part of that. Some housekeeping before I introduce our moderator. Just so you know, we do have the chat if you're able to access it on your toolbar below. You can look there if you need to make any comments, or if you'd like to share any links or resources or affirmation. We'll be sort of engaging with you on the chat down there. So I invite you to go ahead and do that while folks are speaking. As well as I wanted to quickly thank, we have Annie and Evelyn here who are providing ASL interpretation services for our event today. Thank you to them for doing that. We want to make sure that our events are accessible to everybody. And just so an FYI, when the screen share happens, if you do need those services, please change your view to gallery or thumbnail mode so that you can see what's being shared in the media as well as their interpretations. And also this event is going to be recorded as well as streamed live on YouTube, just so you know. And just how the event's going to go today, I'm going to introduce Katie from This Asian American Life. Then she's going to go on and introduce the panelists, and she's going to be the one moderating the discussion. Then we'll have all of the panelists speak. And then there's going to be an audience Q&A at the end. If you have questions, please save them for that time at the end, and then we will try to get to answer all your questions then. So yeah, that's all the housekeeping I have. And so I'm going to now introduce our moderator and our co-presenter, Katie Quan. She is from This Asian American Life, and I'm going to read you her bio. It says here, she's born and raised in San Francisco. Katie Quan, who goes by she, her, is a third-generation Chinese American. She's an illustrator, comic artist, essayist, and artivist. As a descendant of a paper daughter, doctor, grocery store owner, and librarian, her life work centers around Asian American narratives, moments, and spaces. Her comic web series, Generation, has been exhibited at SF Zine Fest, Kearney Street Workshop, Chinese Historical Society of America. Her creative platform, This Asian American Life, gives voice to history, community, and collaboration. Katie currently teaches Asian American Studies at San Francisco State University and City College of San Francisco. So please welcome Katie.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. We are all really incredibly excited for this particular panel. As Melanie said, I am the founder of This Asian American Life. We started out this year and hit an exploration phase in the midst of COVID. And so we are super grateful to be working with APIC for this event. Through art and storytelling, we aim to give voice through history, community, and collaboration. You can learn more about our work through our website, Facebook, and Instagram.
Yeah, I am.
Without further ado, I would like to,
It's not just,
sorry, did the internet cut off?
You're good. We can hear you.
All right. But without further ado, I would like to introduce tonight's panel, The Art of Protest. With a pandemic starting to emerge in its second wave, social movements occurring all over the country, and elections gearing up, our country is in dire need of art that has a message. Loud art, bold art, meaningful art. Our country is in dire, we need art that speaks volumes. Our panelists are emerging and veteran artists that have turned their message of protest, strength, and unity into successful careers. Making their work accessible to the general public, they capture a unique space and stance on entrepreneurship and activism, all while staying true within their communities. We are joined by an amazing group of panelists, Francis Wong, Bob Shing, Shauna Chan, and Cece Carpio. They've worked in the community with such gusto and vigor, and every day are making their impact using art as a form of protest. We are going to have our panelists introduce themselves, and our order will proceed as shown on our event page, starting with Francis, Bob.
Katie, you cut out maybe 2 sentences ago. Oh.
Okay, I'll just repeat that just in case.
We can hear you now.
Okay, perfect. But panelists, we will be starting with Francis, Bob, Shauna, and then Cece. Please keep in mind to speak loud, clear, and slow for our interpreter, and you will have 2 to 3 minutes each. So we are going to start with Francis.
Hello, everybody. I'm Francis Wong, and I'm very pleased to be here and honored to be a part of this panel. I am a musician. I play the saxophone. I write music, and I also am, I guess, a organizer. I organize a lot of events, performances, because when I was coming up, there wasn't very much a venue for work that spoke to our experiences as Asian Americans. And so I, in collaboration with my dear friend, John Jang, formed an organization called Asian Improv Arts, because our tradition, musical tradition, is influenced by the African American experience and practice of improvised music, and also the theme of celebrating our culture, our past culture, as well as our future culture. My own history also includes activism. I was part of the Asian American movement of the 1970s into the 80s to now. And I'm very proud of my participation in grassroots organizing efforts. I have a long history of involvement with the Chinese Progressive Association in San Francisco, as well as other social movements along the way. I'm really excited to be able to participate this evening. I'm looking forward to learning a lot and to be able to, if I can, contribute my own experiences. Thank you.
I'm going to try that again. Oop, let me see.
Thank you. That was an example of some of my work, yeah.
Okay, Bob, would you like to share?
Oh, Bob, I think you're on mute.
Okay, can you hear me now? Thank you, everybody, for inviting me. It's a lovely honor, and I'll try to be as terse as possible. I started doing photography back in college. And the slides are going kind of quickly. If you can go back a little bit. Okay. After college, I went back home to New York City, and I found a group in Chinatown called Basement Workshop. And there I found many, many people of all different fields becoming aware of being Asian American. And Asian American at that time was a very new concept. We were all so-called Orientals or Chinese or Japanese or hyphenated others. So this is a new period in Asian life that I was learning about. At the same time, though, the Vietnam War was going on, and also the very large change in Black people in America saw themselves, and that began to permeate all the various people of color movements, as well as the women's movement, and LGBT movements were also starting a little bit later. And so I joined Basement Workshop, and I began taking some photographs there. These are some of the people. You may recognize some of these folks, I don't know. Many of them became very well known in their respective fields, either art, government, teaching, science, and whatnot. So it was a really very interesting motley crew. So we can go on a little bit. One of my goals in being a photojournalist in the Asian American movement was to make visible the invisible. And as a group, we were very, very invisible. You never heard about Asian Americans protesting. And so I began to follow various protests, demonstrations, and marches in New York and Washington and elsewhere. So this is in Grand Central Station in New York. We can move on now. This is another shot from that whole series of protest movements against the Vietnam War. And Asians were beginning to make themselves known. This is Nobuko Miyamoto and Chris Ajima. They had a singing duo called Grain of Sand. And they toured the US with their original material. They were pretty much one of the first of their kind, really. This was shot in Central Park in New York in 1972. Nobuko used to be a Broadway actress, and then she went on to become part of the movement's main speakers and artists. She eventually moved to Los Angeles. Next slide. This is Chris and Joanne with Charlie Chin on the left. And Charlie was a mainstay of the folk music scene in Greenwich Village in New York. And he had decided to join up with them, and they became the trio known as Chris, Joanne, and Charlie. This is at Folk City, a famous nightclub in New York City that sponsored amazing folk artists like Joan Baez, Bob Dylan, Donovan, and so on. But this is in 1971. Next slide. I'll move it on a little faster. My wife and I, we moved to San Francisco, and we joined Kearny Street Workshop. Kearny Street Workshop was the West Coast arts organization that began in 1970 or so by Jim Dong. And here, what is happening is the I Hotel was being evicted, and we were part of the I Hotel. So the police are coming in to basically usher everybody out of the building. And so basically we had to go. But the I Hotel struggle was a long and very arduous one. Next slide. So this is the eviction evening where maybe 3,000, 2 to 3,000 people gathered to protect the hotel from eviction. But the police finally came and they pretty much emptied out the building despite the barricade. They brought police with mounted, batons and whatnot. This is a scene in Manila Town, across the street. This is the pool hall where a lot of Manongs used to hang out. And I decided to go there and just photograph what was happening. Manila Town, of course, is not there anymore. Along the way, I was photographing other Asian American events. This is, I believe his name is Matsui, and he was one of the protesters who refused to go to the concentration camps during World War II. And he was eventually absolved of his crimes, so-called crimes. And to the right are Hirabayashi and Fred. I'm losing my train of thought here. Anyway, these three famous people were among the most celebrated in terms of fighting the Executive Order 9066. This is our friend I'm really kind of nervous here, so I can't remember names anymore, but anyway.
Bernice Bing.
Bernice, thank you. This is Bernice Bing at her house, and she's doing some abstract work that kind of looks like calligraphy, but it doesn't really have Chinese characters. They're sort of looking like characters, but they're not really. One of my hobbies was photographing artists in their environments. So yeah, please correct me if I've got the facts wrong or whatever. Everybody knows Yuri Goshiyama, of course. I photographed her in Oakland. And this is an exhibit that was at the Presidio, a very large exhibit of famous pictures of the internment. This is a picture of Abacha, who is another good friend of ours. And she regularly does performances at various venues in the Bay Area. She's a poet. And this is in Chinatown. And this is the Rally for Inclusion in 2017. This is a candlelight vigil in Chinatown. This last picture is a project that I was helping out with. These three women whose relatives, fathers or uncles, were harassed by the FBI in the 1950s or 1960s. And they wanted to make a statement about how Asians have been targeted for being spies and being conspirators against the US government, none of which were true. So that's about it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Shauna?
Hi. So my name is Shauna, and I'm the creator behind my brand Bloody Girl Gang. It's a brand that illustrates experience of the marginalized community. So a little background, I'm originally from Singapore, and I moved to California about 16 years ago to further my studies and grow my experience in the animation and game industry that I am no longer in right now. So Bloody Girl Gang, which short BGG, was born from my personal experience being marginalized and my frustration as a woman of color immigrant after leaving a full-time teaching job here in San Francisco back in 2017. So I mean, I'm relatively new to the scene, and I'm really humbled to be on this panel. So I don't have a lot of experience doing activism, I would say, just because a lot of work that I do, it's a sharing from my point of view on what I have gone through personally. So an example of how my work came about in on Bloody Girl Gang was when I was employed as a full-time instructor, I received a phone call from the vice president of this school that, in quote, you should go back to your country because Americans need your job more than you do. And that is just one of many experiences that I experienced, and I wanted to share. I wanted to have a platform to actually share all that, and because I didn't have a community or didn't know of the community that would provide support when I needed to. So, and plus I didn't have any family here. I don't have family still, so all my family is still in Singapore. So all that came about with the work I do now is to build community, to change the narrative, and to share basically. And a little fun fact, I still live in the same studio apartment since college. So that's my little background. And yeah, so that image is the mural that I did during COVID. Actually, it was actually the I think the day I started painting it, it was over a span of 2 days. That is on Kearney Street, and it was commissioned or a collaboration with Paint the Void, and it was quite an experience painting that when everybody, or at least there were people out protesting after the killing of George Floyd, and I really wanted to just give hugs and warmth to everybody that was just devastated with what's happening. And it was really good to be on the street during COVID, oddly, because it was good to actually meet the community, meet people in the neighborhood, which this is my neighborhood. And yeah, some of the work that I do with my illustration that I put on products, and I like hot sauce. So just basically just my expression. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Shauna. Your work is amazing. Cece, would you like to go?
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us here, and it's amazing to be able to see the work of some of the folks that I feel like I've only seen their names on paper. So thank you for having us here, and thank you for having me be part of it. My name is Cece Carpio, and I consider myself a visual storyteller. I immigrated here at the age of 12 from the Philippines, being part of the indigenous diaspora, martial law. So being displaced by martial law and coming here, I think I really gravitated and solidified being so far away from home in our tradition, my solidarity with indigenous communities, immigrant communities, and also really kind of centering my work against global imperialism. So a lot of the work that you're gonna see in the screen tonight that I'm sharing are actually our work that was done very recently during the racial reckoning after George Floyd and Breonna Taylor's death, in terms of how we, as a community of color, could show support with our Black community, who, as an immigrant, I think is a very important acknowledgement that Black liberations have paved ways for us to be here and fight our fight. So these are pieces out on the streets that was done within the realm of 5 hours to 2 days, that was created in downtown Oakland, that essentially led to an outdoor gallery in downtown Oakland to show our solidarity and to show that we stand to defend Black lives. These are created with some folks in my crew and just other homies who we just go out and paint on the street, especially in a time where, I think, and it's going to be part of the discussion later, is just in terms of supporting, contributing, and to the protests and to, what we consider a revolution. In many ways, this is, as a cultural worker, as a visual artist, this is my means of protesting and being able to support. And this is also the remnants of what's going to be left over when protests are over. I mean, a lot of these pieces you can still see downtown Oakland, including this piece, and it still stands. I think it's a lot of the street murals that we were able to create in a very kind of timely manner becomes markers of history, become markers of time, become markers of our current political climate. So these are just some example of some work that I did downtown Oakland, like I guess end of May, early June. It's not, I guess it's now part of a series, but it's just some samples of some more recent stuff that I've done. Yeah, and I'm also been fortunate enough to have amazing mentors here in the Bay Area who have helped shape my artistic craft and to be able to do murals and street art on the walls. Well, this is a series of different pieces I was doing during quarantine and reflections of different communities of colors, both individuals and just folks and families that I know as we deal and go through the pandemic. And yeah, it's just kind of different pieces and work. Some are out in the public and some are out, within my studio. So this was all done in March and April of this year. And yeah, just to finish off, I was saying I'm also part of a collective, been fortunate enough to find family who really share the same love for our craft. And we've been together for, I guess, 16, 17 years now. So we're trust or struggle, and we come from all different walks of life and various different parts of the world, and come together to paint walls, to exhibit, and tour the world to stand in solidarity with movements and organization who shares the same values and envision the type of world that we want to create for ourselves. So we've been together and rocking and touring for a good while now. So yeah, and I think in just essence of creating murals,
No.
it's almost essential to really have a crew and folks to do it with. Just this mere size of big, huge walls, and I'm a 5-foot woman, and it's and I think being in the Bay Area allowed me to be able to find folks to roll with. So yeah, that's a little bit of who I am.
Thank you, Cece, for sharing. And thank you all for sharing and introducing yourselves. We all have such diverse experiences, and it showcases the many different facets of how to view activism and art together. And so to move forward, what is it like to be an activist or an entrepreneur? And what are some of the challenges? And so we're going to start back with Francis.
Well, I think for me, it all started with the fact that the idea of being a musician wasn't even, I didn't even fit what they call the eye test. Sometimes in sports, they talk about the eye test. You look like you could be that. And so at that time, especially in the 70s, for me to try to think about being a musician, that just wasn't, they didn't see us on stage. They didn't, people didn't see us, well, certainly not in playing Black music. And so I had to face a lot of skepticism from my family. My parents didn't understand what I wanted to do and wouldn't support me. And so I had to go on my own. So I think then it's about facing the skepticism in society, that if we don't look like what we're supposed to be able to do, then we can't get paid for that either, and a lot of, but the part about in order to get any good or to make strong statements with our work, we have to be able to do our work. And so being able to get support and to overcome the skepticism about a Chinese American being able to play this music was an important struggle. And I have to say that I would not have been able to go in this direction if I hadn't been invited by musicians, African American musicians, and to be part of the lineage. And that's essentially where Asian improv arts comes from, for me and John Jang and so many others, that if it wasn't for the encouragement of folks like James Newton or Max Roach, David Murray, all sorts of folks, Amiri Baraka, we wouldn't have been able to feel like we could be part of this. And then also all of these mentor master artists really helped us learn the business and learn the ways of being that would enable us to sustain ourselves without, while staying true to our principles and stay true to where we came from.
Bob, would you like to add to that? Bob, I think you're on mute.
Okay, is that better now? Can you hear me? After high school, I went to college, and I was actually a pre-med major. And so I could do fairly well in science, and my grades were okay. But I was more bent for liberal arts. And then I picked up a camera because I was with the newspaper. And I decided, well, I'm going to leave biology where it is for a while and just really get into photography. So that's kind of where my passion went. And then at the same time, in 67, 68, I got introduced to the political chaos, as it were. It was, enveloping the campus. So with my camera, I was able to photograph some of the early resistance against the war machine, the U.S. war machine. And so from there, I just decided to go that way, to become a photographer, because I felt that was really more important in terms of how I saw my life evolving. I went back to New York and joined the Asian American movement, and I found a lot of like minds, some very, very brilliant artists, people who are really committed to change in society, and also to create a culture where we were recognized, where we were not invisible. But we wanted to be seen and heard as were Black Americans, Latino Americans, and on and on. And so that carried into the West Coast. And I found myself in a quandary. I said, well, I really love doing this work, but I can't make a living. So I just finally pushed myself into doing professional photography. So, I would do odds and end jobs, and I expanded my scope from documentary to doing every type of photography that would basically put food on a table. And so after our daughter was born, I finally decided, well, it looks like I'm in this pretty thick. I better go through it. So I decided just to not do the 9-to-5 bit and just become a freelance photographer. So I was able to straddle two worlds, basically. One was the world of just making a living with my cameras, and the other is to document the struggle and the communities that were surrounding us, East Bay, San Francisco, South Bay, and whatnot. And so I evolved that way, and I just decided to help out various organizations, Kearney Street Workshop, Asian American Dance Collective, Asian American Theater Company, eventually Chinese for Affirmative Action, other various groups that were in the community. They would hire me to do their headshots and their documentations and the annual reports and this and that. So I was able to straddle and and be happy in that milieu of that kind of work. Also, I have a great love of music, and so I definitely followed Francis's career and all of his incredible friends who've been making music since the late 70s. And hats off. In doing very important work. Also, I want to mention Mark Izu with KSW, who started the first Asian American Jazz Festival, which became a runaway success in terms of innovation and putting Asian American musicians on the map. Unfortunately, because of finances, as usual, the Jazz Collective had to sort of stop operating. But the tradition and the energy is still going on. I mean, John Jang was also involved with that, of course, and he's had a wonderful career, but also a real commitment to the community and to his ideals of fighting injustices. So that sort of brings me to now, where I'm sort of like semi-retired, but I really don't want to retire. I just want to keep on doing what I have been doing, try to help people out as I, wherever I can. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Bob. Shauna, would you like to go?
Well, I'm learning from everybody through this because, I think for me, going back to this being Asian and doing art, the topic about that, I actually ran away from home to come to America So my family were not supportive of me doing art at all. And so it was, it's, I'm still struggling with just, like the basic things of like, oh, how do you pay your bills as an artist? I guess, and plus, I'm an immigrant, or I mean, I don't have I don't have citizenship here, so I'm not American. I don't get some benefits that some folks think that people like me do, and we don't. I can't get unemployment. Um, During COVID as well, I don't get all that support. So there's a lot of still trying to figure out how to make it work as an artist plus doing activism at the same time. But I guess because my passion's about, equal rights, human rights, immigrant rights, women's rights, everything that I'm being affected by living in this country. So I channel my frustration into doing my work, and yeah, that's, I think, I mean, I would love to ask question to the veterans that's on this panel too, like um what are your advice for someone that is like myself, that's starting, and with what's going on with the world right now. It's like it's hard for an artist to sit back and not do anything about it, but at the same time, how would how do you make a living? Because I feel like I'm still learning and still struggling with this.
Cece, would you like to go? And maybe you have a solution potentially.
I don't know if I have a solution because I do believe everyone, to some extent, could have different paths to look at for models, but essentially we also create our own. Everyone has different experience and different attachments and different intent and purpose and reason why it is that we do what we do. Whether it's the art that we create on the wall or whether it's to support a campaign that elevates or empower a particular constituency, it's essentially we make those choices as far as what we want to prioritize. And I think for me, it was just ever since I've came out here, it just, I don't, sometimes I don't even call it activism per se, is the work that I do, but essentially my work as an artist, my work as a cultural worker, I paint and draw images of people and community that I know, to some extent, a lot of artists' work is autobiographical, and I feel like that's what I paint about. And it so happens that, I've been told, and folks have come up and really could connect and relate and gravitate to that because I'm speaking of stories and of my own experiences. But I think being growing up as a poor working class woman of color is just, that's half of my folks, if not most of us. And I think it's just something that we have a collective shared experience. And that, that does resuscitate to a lot of people in whether we actually have the same racial lineage or whether we're Asians or whether we're not. I think immigrating here, having an immigrant experience and like being part of the working class and being a woman, all those things are kind of like the things that I go through and the things that I experience, and essentially becomes the subject of my work, whether it's about me or whether it's about the people that I know. So as far as sustaining yourself in this work, I think for me, I'm not always necessarily dependent on my art as part of my livelihood, which is a blessing and a curse at the same time, but I am dependent on the creation of my art for my survival. I just can't imagine living life without it. So, and it's the very thing that also feeds me. You know, I happen to be painting about my communities and the folks and the people that I know, and those are the very source that's the very source and the very place that also come and nourish me. So I see it as kind of a reciprocated relationship that I have with this work. That it's still, I'm still in a place that it is feeding me, and you know, definitely I believe that all artists and our work should be compensated, and it is part of our own sustenance and survival. But I think for a long time, I was just creating work, not necessarily thinking of it as my main source of livelihood. And because it's work that I've done throughout a good portion of time, I mean, I'm still both kind of an emerging mid-established artist, depending on where it is and who it is you ask. And I think those labels we also create for ourselves to some extent. I mean, I just am fortunate that because people gravitate to some of the work that I do, you know, people want to offer me projects and compensations, and like someone always wants to try to figure out how we can have images out in public that reflects this. So it is, so I've been very lucky, and it's a consistent work. I mean, it's never stopped. I definitely feel like I'm in the very place that I'm consistently learning how to balance, you know, doing this craft, which I'm totally in love and dependent on my own survival, but also like pacing myself to like be able to spend real time with friends and family and do my own work and just live life. Like it's something that I'm still learning to do.
Thank you, Cece, and thank you again for being open with your heart and being also very vulnerable, especially with challenges. You've mentioned many challenges, really, including family, unpaid labor, care, income, and passion, and there's many, many more. But as such, you've also offered solutions, like finding mentors, friends, and showing off your community stories. And so we want to make sure that we keep time for Q&A. And so this will be our last question. It's also a very heavily loaded question. So hopefully it will give everybody a lot to think about. There are some artists who work commercially and sometimes end up objectifying and profiting off of images of a movement or a community. We see examples such as the jewelry collection wear their names early in September of this year. So how do you make sure your art is humanizing, and how do you ensure it uplifts rather than objectifies? So we're going to start with Francis.
So I think for myself, I'm carry out my practice in the communities that I'm a part of. And if I can't look my friends, members of the community in the eye, after they're seeing my work, I think, well, I just think about it that way. And so that's my sense of accountability. And at the same time, I also am, you know, mindful of the lineages that I'm a part of. And so I have accountability to those lineages as well. And so that's, you know, I mean, so I carry the responsibility of those who've gone on before me. And, you know, when it comes down to it, it's a lot of work to do all this stuff. And so I don't really, you know, I don't have a, I really, the space for me to somehow exploit this, it just doesn't even come to mind for me. So that's kind of how I've kind of dealt with that in my life. I've had a certain path, and I bear responsibility for that path. I'm 63, so I've been doing this for like 50 years, and I try to stay true to that.
Wonderful. Bob?
Yeah. As far as my product goes, or pictures that I produced over since the 1970s, thousands and thousands of images. There's the work that I do strictly for cash and carry. That is, it's a business, and that work, it is what it is. It gets published. It's mostly used internally with organizations, corporations, and whatnot. The other work that I do is very personal, and the personal is political. It's sort of like they evolve into each other, and they're interdependent. So whatever my personal beliefs are in terms of how I want to deal with my subject matter, it's very, I wouldn't want to say it's like, it's protected in the sense that I don't let it out unless those images are going to be used in the right way. I would never let them out to be a commercial or, something to sell luggage or to sell politics, somebody else's politics. Basically, that work is an archive, and hopefully I'd like to get out in some tangible form other than Facebook or Instagram or whatnot. There's a lot of stuff, and there's a lot of people who are urging me to do this. I sort of need a hard push in that direction. There's just so much stuff from 1970, 1980, 1990, through on to, say, 2 weeks ago. So it's an ongoing process of how do you deal with volumes of stuff? I know dancers, choreographers, novelists, poets, they have a certain amount of stuff, but with photographers like us, we're constantly churning out images. I mean, just file after file after file, and it does become troublesome. I mean, we're faced with what do we do with all this? How do we ascertain what is really important and what is not? So that's the kind of struggle that I'm kind of going through right now. I kind of gotten away from the original question, but basically the work that I do for community, that's sort of untouchable. That doesn't go out as far as like a tangible consumer product. That's about it.
Fantastic. Say, Shauna, would you like to add in your own input?
I mean, this is a rough one. Because a lot of my work is digital right now, just because, ideally I would love to paint big paintings, but then when I have a 150 square feet space to work with, where I live in and sleep in, it's not possible right now. So with my work being digital, it's out there on Instagram, on Facebook. People are sharing, and I think it's in the age of instant gratification. There's sometimes low regard for the artists behind the work, or it's seen as, well, you didn't take you too long to do it. So, well, then, I don't need to tag you or like give you credit for it. And that kind of, it somehow, I hate to say this word, it kind of reduces the value of the work that I put out there sometimes. So, but of course, I do make some of my illustration into products to sell, to make a living at some, and it's that line where I do try to stay within my personal experience, my own personal stories, or within the community that I illustrate about. And when it comes to topics like BLM, I think it's a lot of learning for me as a someone who didn't grow up here. I grew up in Singapore, has a different racial system, or a lot of cultural stuff. It's a lot of learning for me. And I didn't want to spend $2,000 for a class at college, to learn about American history. I rather would talk to people or meet people who would share the story with me. And I think I with that with because majority of my work on Bloody Girl Gang is about drawing social issues, and I do make an effort to donate back to the community that I illustrate about. So that's kind of how I've been trying to balance that part with my illustration.
Thank you, Shauna. I know you said that this was a difficult question, but you did wonderfully. Would you like to finish it up?
Oh, me? Sorry, I couldn't hear. You're breaking off.
I think she said Cece, if you
Oh.
would like to finish it off.
Sure. I really resonate with what Mr. Francis was speaking about earlier in terms of accountability to our community. I'm surrounded by mentors and elders and comrades and colleagues who will check me if if they feel like I did something that is essentially disempowering or faulting a particular community or within my constituency. And similarly to what Mr. Francis Wong was saying, it's a blessing and a curse. I mean, essentially, I learned my craft out on the streets, guided by my community in the movement, and that's like the combination of two worlds that I love put together is within my practice. So I honor that and acknowledge that, recognize that, and as I said, I have mentors and elders that has been part of this lineage. I mean, this work did not start within my generation or even their generation. Has been going on for a long time. So there has been patterns and kind of like sometimes unspoken moral codes that we need to abide by, whether or not we're conscious or subconscious of that. And that is ingrained also within my practice. But, I'm not saying I do it well all the time. And I'm still, and it changes and it evolves. I mean, our current political climate, it necessitates a whole different tactic of figuring out how to recover from where we're at currently, where we're now. And I do believe that culture and innovation and creativity plays a big significant role in figuring out how we come out of this. So that's, and that's, kind of within this mix of this generation in which I'm part of, where I know elders who've gone through civil rights movements and and have passed on are still here, passing on those lessons. And now we're kind of, in some ways, going through the next big, huge thing and trying to kind of imagine how to contribute to that and what type of world we want to create and recover and transition into after this like global health, economic, and racial pandemic that is pretty much on our face right now and inevitably impacting how we want to direct our lives. But, and I think it's, and given all of that, with the question of like commodification of the work, it being political and stuff, I think right now too, especially hard to be honest, as much as I value and I've been held and accountable with communities and folks that I'm with, it's actually a little tough just because the political thing is kind of what's cool and trendy right now. That's kind of what everyone wants. Like I've gotten more, people had been like asking me for projects and gigs everywhere and like from nonprofit organizations to actual corporations and companies. And it's funny, it's interesting because, you know, this is work I've always done prior to this pandemic, prior to this uprising, and more so than ever. I mean, maybe 4 years ago when, you know, this administration came to place, I definitely also had a wave of a lot of people just consistently asking to create work that reflects the time and reflects a whole different perspective, different side of what's actually out in the mainstream. But it's a balancing act because I think now everyone wants to be down, you know? And so to be accountable to community who stands who stands for something, who's been working so hard to create this movement. And now, like, you know, branded logos and companies wants that too. And they're the one who has capital to actually like compensate you rightfully to do the work. And so how do you balance all of that? And I don't necessarily have the answer because in one way it's like some of those opportunities does provide platform for our message and for our ideas to be put out in a more massive scale. But I think it's kind of like the whole negotiation of being able to do the work without having to compromise your politics is consistently, in my mind, every time I take on an opportunity. But it's an important question. And again, I don't think there is one answer. And I think it's a consistent answer. I mean, it's a consistent question that us individuals who are, you know, accountable to our communities, accountable to a movement, accountable for our organization. I mean, it's just an inevitable question. So we have to deal with every time.
You, like, everybody has brought up really, really great points this evening. It's starting out from, you know, being accountable to personal politics, to age of instant gratification specifically. And then lastly, to movement as a trend and how do you deal with that? And this is a conversation that we can have all day and would definitely not run out of different topics to speak to. And so with that, we would like to actually open it up to our audience. And so feel free to unmute your microphone, excuse me, or type in the questions into our chat and we will try to get to everything. So who would like to start? Don't be shy.
I have a question for Cece. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. So I'm a poet. I love your work. I live in Oakland. And I'm wondering of your language what languages you know, and how you negotiate if you use any text, in your murals or your art, and how do you go about that, or just artistically?
Yeah, Tagalog is my native language, and I learned English as a second language. But having been here, I've learned to kind of like adapt to learn. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm fluent in any of the languages I speak now, but learn like Spanish and other languages, whatnot. But to be honest, I actually don't include a lot of text in my work. A lot of my work are kind of visual storytelling through imagery, primarily because for the mere reason that I want it to also have space to be interpreted by the audience, versus me kind of directing their full intake on what the work is about. And also I grew up with I was raised by my great grandmother who was illiterate, and a big part of my visual art, of my practice is becomes a form of communication. And I think even now that still holds true for me. I still struggle with words sometimes. I mean, it wasn't until like just 10 years ago that I started doing public speaking. It's not necessarily my preferred place to communicate. But I'm learning, and I'm learning it's relevant and important even within the work that I do as a visual artist. And so given that I don't necessarily use a lot of text all the time within the work that I do, many times there's like songs and poetry and quotes that inspires me that I create visual art with. And I think the samples that I just shown earlier had a specific text because he was specifically talking about a particular moment in time. And it was also being created and done within like a span of like 6 hours. And so I felt like he needed to add some text in order for me to kind of words out that I just couldn't formulate during that time. So, but yeah, thank you. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, that's great. That's very profound, actually. Salamat.
Thank you. And Melanie has a question for all the panelists, asking, do you have any advice for emerging artists? Sorry.
Oh, real quickly, I'll just say that I think I generally just say be part of a crew. I think that was key to my development and my sustainability, because if it wasn't for the people I worked with and kind of, because we don't do things all by ourselves. We do things with other people. And I think that we can model trust, love, accountability, only in connection with others. And I think that I feel fortunate to have had those colleagues or comrades, along the way. And I continue to have, it was nice, Bob, I remember one of my first times I went to a jam session on 2nd Avenue back in the 70s. Bob was there. He was playing the flute. And so I just, to me, I just have these memories, and a lot of those memories keep us going.
Yeah, I probably want to echo a lot of Francis's sentiments and thinking. When I first got into the Asian American movement, as it were, I noticed that there was a tremendous spirit of generosity among people, our peers, our colleagues, people in similar disciplines. That generosity was marked by a collective spirit. We were never really competing against one another. We were always working to help each other gain a footing or gain more knowledge. Specifically, I knew it. Several photographers at Kearney Street Workshop when we began the photo classes. And we were from all different levels of abilities and academia. Some people were getting their masters, others were getting their, the BAs, and others like me had pretty much elected not to go to formal education and actually learn by doing. So anyway, make a long story short, artists in practice need to find like minds and like spirits, and then you build the ladder together. And that way you can, you don't measure success on your latest work that's sold or anything. You measure success in terms of how you're pushing the agenda forward or pushing ideas forward, not just for yourself, but as a collective or for some greater purpose other than your ego. I just found that very compelling. After a while, that became sort of like a way of life. Yeah.
Shauna, Cece, would you like to that question?
Yeah, I mean, I would second what our elders just shared with us, and I hope I'm not offending either of you. I was calling you all elders, you're just all older than me. But I think find your peoples. It's so important to find your people. I mean, this work could never be done on your own. Regardless, I mean, like, you're out being an artivist, I guess that's the new term now. But doing culture work, I mean, it's like you're out for a fight. You're out there, like it's funny, like what do you give advice to an emerging artist? And I'm just like, it's not easy work. It's hard work. It's challenging work. Like you gotta want to do it, and you gotta know why you want to do it. And I think equip ourselves, and it's an ongoing thing, like just really like do your research, do your homework, educate ourselves. And I'm saying that because there's still things that I consistently am doing, whether it's to elevate your craft or whether it's to sharpen your tools about what it is that you're creating about, because we got to be as sharp as the things that we want to change. And that is what is necessary and required to make real change. So this is, it's a trek. I mean, there's moments I'm just like I never question why I'm doing it, but there's definitely moments I'm just like, are we going anywhere? Or where the heck are we going? But through it all, like I never questioned that it's always been worth it.
I have maybe a part question and part comment I'd like to put to the group, because I'm kind of at a loss, and I want to frame it as a question as well. I also started in the Asian American movement from the 70s on, and doing photography and poster making and work with different collectives. And that's probably been my most aside from being that I was younger, that was my most prolific time. And then around the turn of the century, when most of the movements and the organizations dissipated, I was pretty much on my own. And I also started to look elsewhere other than politics for answers to questions of how my art can improve life for people in general. So it's very difficult for me to frame my art in the left politics that's been predominant in art and activism. So I started to look into like Buddhism and different spiritual studies, and also my own native culture, Chinese culture, and traditional stuff. And I'm working on that now and experimenting and finding new forms. But I also feel extremely isolated because I don't have that kind of a spiritual art community. I looked into different groups. They're either very traditional Asian groups that I can't quite relate to, or a lot of Buddhists are mostly white people. And I have a hard time relating to that. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm still looking, and I don't know where to find the community that I want as an art community. Yeah, so I don't know if that means anything. I'm not asking a question or making a comment. I'm just sort of airing what's on my mind, and it's a little difficult to exactly articulate what I'm feeling. But in the meantime, I'm cranking out this work because I feel that as an artist, I'm driven to do stuff, and that's when I feel best, is when I'm doing some artwork. But I guess I'm not finding the social community for it right now. So I hope that maybe just coming to a lot of these things, and I can find some partners in crime, so to speak.
That's an important point. I think, Leon, when we were, say, in our late 20s, early 30s, political climate, the arts communities in San Francisco, New York, wherever, they had models of being artists and collectivism that don't exist now.
Yeah.
Because we took our models from Cuba, from the People's Republic, and from Central America.
Yes.
And so all those factors, all those principles of art making and the reasons for doing art were pretty much solidified in our minds. And as time has drifted toward like the millennium, we're faced with new challenges. And how do we keep our art relevant, not just to our soul, but to the collective body that we used to belong to? In a sense, that spiritual body, it still exists. It's just that it's not tangential form now, because history has changed and the times have changed, and especially in the US, the kind of aggressive individualism that's going on now in the art world has sort of like neutralized a lot of the thinking and a lot of the momentum that we built up, say, in the 70s and the 80s. I may be wrong, but that's how I see it right now.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons why I said find a crew, because I think there's new forms of collectivism that have come along, and particularly because I can't come out of learning from Black music and Black musicians, and there's just a wide variety of approaches that folks used and then have gone on, from Sun Ra to, John Coltrane to whoever. But, hip hop music has hip hop culture has brought new form. Of course, there's continuing struggle over how to make these how to create community in this. But I think that's where I feel like there's different ways in which to think about it. Like even as a musician, because of the innovations in the hip hop area, you know, in terms of Black urban culture, you know, just thinking more broadly, because as a musician, we never used to think about clothes. Well, some of the hip guys did, yeah, you know, but, you know,
Fred Ho.
but clothes, visual art, dance, you know, just more integrated approach, and spirituality as well, because I know that would, so I think it's like keeping up to date and about new forms of collectivism, because I think that there's a lot, I mean, I find I have a lot to learn.
You know, it's a very central question. And like I said, the personal is the political. Basically, we haven't dealt with capitalism with the big C. I mean, capitalism is one of the reasons I feel that artists are finding themselves in such a quandary. And there's so much personal angst over being a success. And this is all part of the capitalist mindset, I feel, that has really, I wouldn't say destroyed people, but has made people very, very aggressive, very, very selfish and not caring. And I've, all my, you know, in my working life, I've tried to avoid being set in that trap, you know, and remembering more my original purpose of being a photographer. So there's always like this push and pull, there's this tug of war between one's personal interests and one's political interests, in terms of what ultimately are we doing this for?
And with that very, very thought-provoking question, we will end our event here. I know that there's still a lot to discuss and that we've only really touched upon the surface of many, many more questions to come. And so hopefully, you know, maybe this will end up becoming a whole different discussion series and we can learn from one another. But on behalf of this Asian American Life and APIC, we would like to thank you for really being here tonight for this discussion and exploring all the different personal experiences and the ways in which our different generations are really interacting with one another. And so I'd like to see if Diana or Melanie has anything they'd like to add.
Oh, hi y'all. Tuning in again. I just want to say thank you so much to all the artists here for being in this discussion. Like Kitty was saying, it's really great to have these intergenerational conversations because I feel like we learn so much from each other. And as you can see, you know, just with the folks, this is just like a drop of what the folks are that are out there doing this work. We all come from a long lineage of artists, of activists. We, you know, since the beginning, we've been there doing this work, fighting for our causes. So it's really great to be here in this virtual space, sharing it all with you, and to listen and hear the insight that you all have had. I think there's been some really great quotes that we've captured in the chat, as well as some great advice. So and for folks who haven't been able to join us, this will be recorded on YouTube. So if anyone wants to tune in later, just check out APIC's YouTube channel and you can watch the whole discussion there as well. But yes, I'm just very grateful for all of you for being here and joining us in this discussion.
Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
Night.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
That was fun.
Hopefully we'll do some more
Okay.
in the future.
Bye.
Bye.
Everyone's signing off. We're still here.
That was amazing.
Amazing.
Thank you so much, Annie and Evelyn
Yes,
and
thank you.
Katie and Melanie.
Thank you.
Shauna.
Yes, thank you.
Oh yes, Shauna. All right. I hope you all have a good night.
Yes, thank you.
Feel free to send us feedback too, since this is our first ASL event. Thank you.
Yes,
Yeah.
and vice
We'll
versa.
stay in touch. Yeah.
Thank you so
All
much.
right, talk to you soon.
Bye.
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 Diana,
Okay.
are we
We're
good?
good.